Very good. We're good.
All right, everybody. Thanks for coming. I am not Maurice Schweitzer. I am Alec Lamont. I am the lead for the research analytics team at Wharton Computing, where we support the research and analytics work at the school. Robert's part of that team and is huge. We're big partners with the Behavioral Lab. So I'm happy to introduce Robert Botto, who's going to be talking about LLMs. Specifically, we hear a lot about the hype for what they can do for us, but he's going to start with what kind of the dark side of LLMs and how they might actually affect negatively the responses we get when we're running surveys and other things online. So, Robert, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Cool. So, I'm Robert Botto. I work research computing, but primarily for the Behavioral Lab. There we go. So we're going to talk about large language models this month and next. So we'll start with an overall introduction. So large language models, as you've probably noticed, introduced a rapid increase in the adoption of machine learning methods for all sorts of tasks, especially in higher ed. And the models we'll be looking at are really the ones that are fine-tuned for text generation. Now these models aren't really new. They're artificial neural nets essentially, but something has changed. And really the scale at which they've been trained has increased dramatically. Some improvements to the architectures. You'll hear transformer architecture is one that most of these current generation models are using. They have a mechanism called self-attention, which increases the efficiency of their training computation. And GPU manufacturers have put a lot of effort into faster hardware, which is what runs these. We're going to use LLM a lot and not artificial intelligence so much to talk about this stuff, even though you'll hear enthusiastic announcements that we're in the age of AI somehow now. But I don't think that's really helpful. I want to talk about really practical applications of LLM and how they are affecting research. What are they? For the purposes of this discussion, they're very good stochastic probabilistic models for the output of really plausible stuff from natural language inputs. What kind of stuff can you get out of them? Text, multimedia, program code, instructions, many other things. But text and sort of the process instruction side of things is what we'll look at. Yeah, what makes them so effective? They're very computationally efficient compared to earlier forms of recurrent neural nets, which leads to the ability to train these on extremely large data sets. The state-of-the-art GPTs are trained on tens of trillions of tokens. Then in practice, when using them, they're able to remember the sort of a large context in which they're being used. They can adapt to environmental changes in your, say, session with one. And that these companies have invested tens of millions of dollars for each model's training. So just a lot of effort put in. I've included here a diagram of what an encoder decoder model looks like. If you do a lot of reading in this area, you'll see this a lot. The one GPT that we're looking at is a decoder only model. So really tuned for text generation, not so much understanding. So how does this affect us in behavioral research? As Alec mentioned, there are positive and negative issues. So positive side, you've probably experienced this if you're doing research. They can really help with idea generation. They can help with routine tasks like error checking, looking at your surveys, proofreading, some steps in data processing, data cleaning, data analysis. I did mention here to use caution. I've personally noticed that it's really checking their work is really important. You'll always check the dimensions of your data set that you expect, check the ranges of values that you expect, because these LLMs can throw you curveballs. Even when you expect something to be routine, sometimes it will mangle your data. Okay, so that's something we're going to talk more about next month. For this month, we're going to talk about the fact that our panel participants have access to these tools also. So can you trust the data they're inputting into your surveys, for example? Are your observations just LLM-enabled bot farms, just auto-filling surveys, banking your incentive payments? Is online research fundamentally broken? Should we be panicking? This is really an issue of data quality, and the use of these automated tools is definitely on the rise, and it's more challenging than ever to identify them on a per response basis because the text is so plausible. But really the most effective protections are the basic best practices that you're sort of probably already aware of. Checking for inattention, using attention checks. These are effective both for inattentive participants as well as fraudulent participants. These will sort of catch both. Same with low effort, analyzing choice responses for coherence, asking the same sorts of questions in different ways. Using open-ended questions still is very effective. And we'll talk about why that's still effective, even though detection has gotten harder. Using timers and to record recording interactions to check for speeding and plausible time. And identity verification. So asking about location, asking about demographics, comparing if you have pre-screen responses, comparing that to say a current observation. These are all tried and true methods that are still highly relevant. But what is a bot? I think it's like good to think about what we really mean when we're concerned about survey automation. So basic stuff that's been around for a long time, macros. There's something like one called auto hotkey, things like this that can just record and play back user interaction. So you can record clicking a bunch of radio buttons. You can have key hotkeys that will pre-fill predetermined text that you've maybe prepared ahead of time, help you navigate through a survey quickly. These are tools that people who do surveys for money will use to make that activity more efficient. This is kind of dumb automation. It can't react to changes very well. But it's cheap, it's easy to use. And I think that for that reason, we'll still see a lot of people trying that. And that's probably still the majority of automation that you see out there. Next step in sort of complexity, there's scripting libraries that will help you do more advanced browser automation. These libraries are mostly designed for like UI, for testing, like developers testing their web applications. But these automated agents that you build can adapt to much more dynamic surveys. You can build sort of complex decision trees. If do this other thing that's harder to do with just a plain macro. You can even try to introduce some randomness to it so that it looks a little bit more like a human interacting with the page to evade certain types of detection. Now, this is a lot more effort than, say, a browser plugin macro. So how many are people using this stuff? For sure. But it's, I think, a much smaller group of sort of bad actors that are using this more sophisticated sort of browser automation. We haven't talked about large language models yet. So, but that's our concern. So can a large language model just do your survey? Thankfully, it's not easy. Here's a quick, I asked ChatGPT here to go fill out a survey for me. As you can see, it responds that it cannot actually interact with any web page, let alone a survey. So it's not like our participants can just go use ChatGPT to do a survey. There's actually a lot of effort that's involved. Now, they can interactively use it. They can have ChatGPT open on another browser window. They can copy and paste your questions into it, or copy them in and then paste the responses back in. But that's not really automation. That's a shortcut, and we'll talk about ways of identifying that. So what if we put this up? So you'll notice that ChatGPT does offer assistance in designing a strategy. If you were to do that, what it would say is, go use one of those browser automation libraries, like Selenium and Python is one. And it will say, then maybe pass questions to the OpenAI API to get natural language responses back. So in theory, you could put these technologies together and create an automated script that could maintain a plausible context, adopt a sort of coherent persona, and respond to, say, drop downs, radio buttons, and open-ended text in a coherent human-like way. But what is the effort that it would take to do that? Are people bothering to do this kind of work? I decided to try and see what it would take. We're looking at some Python code here. I have a module that connects to OpenAI. I have a module that uses Selenium to do some browser automation. I have a config file that contains a bunch of randomly generated personas. And I gave it a survey URL. We'll watch it in action. Now, I spent one day on this. It still needs a lot of work. But here it is, already making mistakes, but thinking about its favorite color and then dumping a few hundred words in. Here it's answering demographic information and some kind of checks. And it's done. I think on the right side of the screen here, I'll open up the config file. So you can see it looks like we randomly selected this person in the middle, this Michael Johnson, who's 40. So when it asked for date of birth, it did correctly. I think in the code, you do have to tell ChatGPT what day it is. It doesn't know that information. It chose a zip code from Chicago. It correctly used yellow as its favorite color, and sort of did consistently use this person as its context and background for survey responses. There we go. So that was a slightly smart bot filling out a survey. It does a lot of shortcomings. I'm not using ChatGPT to remember the radio buttons. I think I could with another day or two of effort. It's really challenging. And the more you build that context, the more that can contradict other instructions you've given it. So building its memory requires actually a lot of decision trees also, and really contextual prompts for each question type. Other simpler things we could implement, make the typing look a little more natural, slow it down, maybe prompt a little better to make less obvious AI sort of text. I mean, AI text is super eager and wordy. It's often truncated because often you tell it to do only so many tokens and it'll end mid-sentence. I don't know if you noticed, it filled out the form by type. So it did all the radio buttons first and then the text. So things like that are tells that this is a automation and not a person. But in theory, you could work all that out. Why? Why do you need to make those improvements? Well, to evade detection. So when protecting surveys, there's a lot to look for. Again, a lot of this is basic pre-GPT strategies. But looking at response patterns is probably the best thing. So what does that mean? So do their choices, say, in a group of scales seem random? Or do do they contradict one another? Or are they implausible? Our response is low effort. Our scale is all flatlined. Is the text nonsensical? Does it seem like they copy and pasted? So effective detection does start with good survey design. So design your questions with those measures in mind. Include questions that can be compared for internal consistency. Include implausible options for some questions. And definitely include a lot of open-ended questions or some open-ended questions. You also want to look at external details. What we mean by that is how the user is interacting with your survey. So keystroke logging is a really effective way of determining whether like a person was interacting with us or whether it was automated. You can do that in real time or after the fact, and we'll look at some examples of that. You can also look at metadata like the IP address, browser information, network information to just help flag suspicious activity. This is more of a trait, I guess you look at. It's a profiling technique. Digital fingerprinting is one way of talking about it, and we have some tools you can use to help flag suspicious agents. So while an adversary can introduce like random movements to mouse and keyboard interaction, it's usually detectable, and simple timing measures and even navigation delays can help identify it or disincentivize people from trying to, if they can't rush through your survey, then it might not be worth the effort to try to cheat. Starting with a tool that we're all familiar with, and at least in the behavior lab, is Qualtrics. So Qualtrics can help. You should be using Qualtrics or a tool like it. You probably are. So there are some ways to flag bots or prevent them from using your surveys. If you go to survey option security for any survey, you'll see two things. You'll see, well, a bunch of things, but two relevant ones are bot detection and relevant ID. So we'll talk about bot detection first. All that does is it brings in Google's reCAPTCHA 3 JavaScript library into your survey. Unlike the sort of CAPTCHA questions that ask you to click a button or identify all the bicycles in a picture or something, this is invisible. It's just behind the scenes, and it's measuring the user behavior as I was describing earlier. It's looking at mouse movements, it's looking at keystroke, and it's assigning a score between 0 and 1. I will say also, when I added this, my bot stopped working. Now again, my bot's kind of dumb. I only spent a few hours working on it. I could probably figure it out, but something about the way it's measuring that information is also blocking my automated interaction. So definitely turn that on. If you're using Qualtrics, it's invisible. Whether or not you even look at the value, it might help. So number one, do that. The other feature we saw in Qualtrics there was called relevant ID. So this is also a third-party tool like the reCAPTCHA 3. This is more of the digital fingerprinting side of things. So it gives you these fraud likelihood scores and duplicate likelihood scores based on browser network metadata and information that it's collecting about that IP address. It does so anonymously, including like GDPR protections. And then it'll set a few embedded data values in your survey that you can look at. And I think it also has a reset schedule that you can set up yourself so that it will reset those values on a schedule like every month or so, as it builds this sort of almost like a reputation for that digital fingerprint. Oh, and Qualtrics also has just the more old-fashioned CAPTCHA verification question. If you want to add that to the beginning of a survey, that doesn't like give you any data. That's the sort of thing that asks a person to click on items in a picture or something like that. And it just
Robert?
Yes.
I just had a quick question on the previous one.
Yeah.
What does it give a relevant ID? Does it give you a score for the robot likelihood for everybody that's in your panel? Is that what it does?
Yeah, so I didn't include all the details here. It actually gives like 4 different scores. Some of them are about, 2 of them are about possible duplication. And so I think it's actually looking at other questions it answered in that same survey and whether they're sort of answering the same thing every time. And then another one is more of like a reputational score. And that one is just like fraud likelihood, yes. So I think that's a 0 to 100 likelihood scale that this might be. So it's just a soft, you could set a threshold or just above which sort of further scrutinize, I think, a response.
Okay, so these would be like, let's say, 3 or 4 extra columns in the data that you get back.
Exactly.
Like that. Okay.
Yeah, that's how we're doing.
Yeah.
Another tool. So this is a new tool that I've been looking at. It's started by 2 doctoral students from Princeton called Roundtable. It's a bot detection and data quality service. Their market is mostly market research firms, people who are distributing more widely, say, surveys for pay anonymously through social media or to mTurk. So they're really attracting a lot of bots. So in that field, it's really important to try to flag responses. So that what it does is analyzes the open-ended text response data and assigns a whole panel of scores based on both the natural language processing of the data itself, but also does detailed keystroke logging to look at those behavioral measures. Is the typing varied enough, or is it very regular and indicative of a bot? You can use this in Qualtrics, and I'll show an example of this. You just put their JavaScript into your question, and then after you've collected data, you upload your data set to the service, and it goes and gives you a score. So here, these 7 responses were all generated by that bot that I showed you earlier. It flagged every single one of them as suspicious. 6 out of 10, it identified unnatural typing. I'm sorry, 6 out of 7. 7 out of 7, it decided that the text was definitely generated by GPT. And the reason that one of them wasn't is that for one of them, what I did is I took the GPT text and I typed it in myself by hand, just to see if it would still flag the content. And what we're looking at here are 2 of the visualizations of 2 of the typing patterns. On the left, that very regular one, that's a bot just typing in code 1 character per millisecond. To the right is me slowly, awkwardly typing in. And you can see that the variation there was past scrutiny. But if you look, you can see in the middle, the sort of text that GPT will generate by default, which is very unlikely that a participant in one of our surveys would describe their favorite colors in such sort of like encyclopedic and ridiculous ways. And you'll notice on the left, this guy's like, because one of the prompts you give the persona is where they live. So, and I've noticed if you do that, they'll work that into every answer. Like their favorite color is always because they live in Boston or because they're a doctor or something like that. It's really silly. Again, you can work around that with better prompt engineering, but that's what you get by default. Tracking panels is a really important thing. So as I kind of mentioned, like market research firms, they're often casting a really wide net. Their things are posted publicly. The less you do that, the more targeted you sample, the less likely it is you're going to attract some like for-profit bot form. So panel providers, the Wharton Behavioral Lab is one. We do identity verification. We do some pre-screening questions, so we can identify some suspicious accounts before they even do a survey, before they're even like invited to do surveys. So sampling from trusted panels is really important to ensure your integrity of your data collection. One of the partners we work with most is Prolific. Prolific is a panel provider. If you do online work with Behavioral Lab, you've probably used them. And we're actually going to hear from somebody. I think we have Laura from Prolific on the call now. And I wanted to talk with her about what they've noticed in the past few years in terms of fraudulent participant accounts, data quality, and how they've reacted to it. So Laura, feel free to jump on the call.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm here in very sunny London, actually. So I'm really thrilled to be dialing in. I think that your overview so far, Robert, has been super comprehensive as well in terms of, the different types of bad actors that we're seeing now too. But I guess focusing specifically on bots and the work that Prolific's done in the past and is continuing to do on how we address those within our participant pool itself. So, you'll all be familiar, hopefully, with Prolific and who we are, but we've got a participant pool of just over 230,000 participants. That's growing on a daily basis. Globally, over 38 countries. They are, to give you a bit of an insight into how they become participants as well, if you don't know, they are manually taken off a wait list. So they have to apply to become a participant, and then they wait quite a significant amount of time before they do become a participant. I think we've got over 1 million people on our wait list kind of being filtered through on a gradual basis. So in terms of how we keep bots and bad actors out, they go through quite rigorous vetting process. So that vetting process ensures that our participants are honest, attentive, and reliable. And if any of you are active on any Reddit threads and you keep up to date with how Prolific's being used by participants, and you interact with participants on a day-to-day basis, you might see that our participants they're almost like an extension of the Prolific team here. So, the vast majority of them act well within the rules, and they know what's expected of them, and they follow those rules, and they'll flag to us if a study is something that they want to bring to our attention. So they go through a really rigorous vetting process. We verify them through a tool called Onfido, as you would when you create a bank account, for example. If you're doing online banking, you might have to provide a video of yourself speaking and share a picture of your ID. They go through a similar process. So email, phone, photo ID. They'll need to add things like their PayPal address. So we undertake quite a rigorous kind of verification process with them. We also do regular technical checks as well. So behind the scenes at Prolific, there's an incredible team of people doing these bot checks. Obviously, we do have some technical checks built in, but there are also people behind the scenes making sure that these bad actors and bots are not necessarily being used. So technical checks include things like we're checking IP addresses for IP behavior. We check kind of device and browser info and VPN usage as well. They also have to do an initial test study, and if any of you have been participants yourself in some studies, you'll know that that's pretty commonplace. But that does include quite rigorous attention, comprehension, and honesty checks. So that's how we kind of keep them out from the start. But in terms of how we monitor them on an ongoing basis and control that's through those kind of manual checks on our side, but then the technical checks too. So we use an algorithm called Protocol to perform ongoing checks on the platform. That helps identify bots and bad actors that can abuse the system. Our participant feedback, like I said, is reviewed regularly, almost on an hourly basis, and problematic accounts can be banned. And that's something that we encourage our researchers to raise to us as well if they notice that something is a little bit off. And Robert, everything you've been talking about, how we can make sure those checks are being done properly and enhancing our surveys and using certain tools to do that on our side, like through the likes of Qualtrics, means that it makes it easier to identify those problematic accounts on an ongoing basis and flag them. Reporting to the suspicious activity as well. We really recommend that if you see suspicious activity and anything that Robert's mentioned that might appear a bit I can't say that word because it's 4:30, that you report that, whether that's to Prolific or to the likes of Qualtrics or Roundtable or any other tool that you're using. And if you know a lot about Prolific and you've done a little bit of research into us, there are a couple of independent studies out there that kind of show how Prolific participants are more attentive and in terms of our data quality, how we perform in terms of data quality. So I'd encourage you to kind of go and have a look at those. But I think generally speaking, if you feel like your data quality is compromised when you're using Prolific, share that evidence with us as a team, and that can be me or it can be through our support function. But I'm very happy for moving forward for you to use me as that point of contact to flag anything like that, any concerns that you have or suggestions that you want to make as well. I think really important is that Prolific's really hot on this, that our participants are, there's certain principles that we have in place for payment of them and fair and ethical rewards. I think allowing some leeway for participants as well who do show effort, even if their data isn't high quality, and an element of suspicion maybe, but also an open mind that it might appear to be a bot, but is it actually? And Prolific can help with identifying whether that's the case or not. There's a whole host of other, and I know we don't have all the time in the world, and maybe perhaps, Robert, this is something that we come back to, but there's a whole range of different tools and techniques that Prolific recommend, and those other tools that you mentioned, Robert, recommends. Sorry, it's a little bit noisy behind me. As to how to make sure data quality doesn't get compromised, and that you have more visibility. Sorry, it's gone a little bit loud. More visibility of those submissions that you think may be sit on the fence. So there's lots of guides available on the Prolific website as well that we can share after this call. But in terms of what Prolific's doing, there's an awful lot that we do on a day-to-day basis, but also a lot that we are doing as well. So Prolific, as I'm sure you'll all be aware, we have this huge participant pool, but our kind of long-term vision is to be able to allow researchers to collect human-powered data at scale. So that's feeding into this space as well, and helping these tools to develop in a way that that means that they can't replace humans, for example. So hopefully I've given a little bit of insight there into Prolific and how we can help and what we're doing. But I'm very happy to be that port of call if there is anything that you are concerned about when it comes to the quality of your data too. And of course, here to kind of answer any questions as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so we really see you as not only a trusted partner, but the cutting edge of or sort of the front lines of handling these kinds of more advanced tools that bad actors are using, and how to identify them, both in terms of identifying and verifying people through identity verification, and then the more technical tests, as you mentioned. I think that we could learn from you and adopt some of your methodologies as well for the portion of the behavioral lab panel that is exclusively online. Now, our panel is mostly people will come to our lab, but they do some work online. Some of our panel actually never come to our lab. So I think that's something that we have some of our own protocols and methodologies, but I think there's a lot we can learn from you. Thank you so much. And before we move on, actually, are there questions for Laura directly before we continue? Okay. Oh, in the room we have one.
Is there like an overview of all the things she just described?
I think so. There was a URL that I was given from Prolific. Is that I can share that with you directly.
Yeah.
It's easy to find on their website. I think it's right up front. So I think that best practices checklist is long overdue for something like this. And a few things to start with, are you using a trusted panel with targeted distribution? You're going to have I think most behavioral lab researchers you're using the behavioral lab or using Prolific, maybe cloud research, you're using something. You're not just sending a link out to MTurk or through some public channel. Are using a capture or recapture service to try to identify or slow down or even stop bots? Are you designing your questions with sort of detection in mind? Are you using timing questions? Are you measuring keystrokes if you want to get that granular with your open ended questions. Are you working in navigation delays? Another thing we didn't really talk about too much, but you can prevent copy and paste using JavaScript. So maybe you want to put that into some of your surveys and prevent, at least on pages with text entry, the ability to paste. Again, if you're using Qualtrics, and you probably should be using that or something like it, do things like input validation, because that can really trip up a bot. It's a lot harder to handle questions when the response has to be in a very specific format. They can't always adapt to that. And then beforehand, do you define your data quality metrics? Like kind of know what you're looking for and have an action plan for how you're going to do you have some thresholds under which you're going to reject observations, something like that, how you're going to get the sample size that you need for the power that you need, knowing that you're going to run into some of these issues and have a plan to identify them. So initiatives for the future, this is definitely not the end of LLM innovation. My best guess right now is that even the advanced use that I showed, I think is not common, but it will be. It's definitely going to, that as people share code, as people develop frameworks to capitalize on paid surveys, I think that we'll see more and more. So the checklist I sort of previewed earlier, we will publish a fuller version of that as a web page, and it'll be available from the Behavioral Lab site and from the Wharton Research IT site. As things change, that we'll adapt that and update. But one thing Laura was mentioning before, hearing from you about bad data, about bad actors is really important. So if you work with us, then and Sue McCafferty in the lab, report bad data back to us. Let us know at least a percentage, but details would be important. Like, this is why I think that why I had to throw out these responses, and then we can identify it. And it might be due to LLM use. It could be something else, but likely that's going to be this is going to be this is the technology that's going to be it's going to complicate the data quality issues going forward. And we want to be able to just take what we learned from everybody and improve the WBL in general. So I think that's the end of that. We're open for questions if we have any in the room or online. And yes, another one in the room.
Maybe just the input validation. Can you give an example what would go up the bubble?
Well, so like one question that I added to that Qualtrics survey was a bit artificial, but it was an arithmetic question, like what is this number times this number? But it was written in text. And then if you enter, so it was like, I think it was 12 times 5, but written out. The response I want is the number 60, but 60. LLMs will, if it's prompted with letters, for example, will almost always respond with letters. So if you then redisplay and say, no, definitely respond with just digits, an LLM might have. So that's one example, is like number only, especially in a context where, and also LLMs, if you don't prompt them well, always want to make a full sentence out of something. You say, what is your zip code? They will type in, my zip code is, and write it out. So, I was able to work around that with my own code, but you have to write a lot of special case for that. And so the more specific your validation, the more likely you are to break those sort of decision trees that people have built into their LLMs, if they're even have built something that, so date, have someone enter a date, but be very specific about the format that they use.
And
but these are artificial, but of course, if you think about like actual data you might be requesting, and like, and just be it's like good practice in general. And I don't want to like think that everyone's surveys have to be burdened with all these extra questions just to like trip things up. So of course, think about ways that these might fit into the data you're actually looking for. But if not, at least add a few that will help with So if that's it, we will we'll be doing this again next month. I think everyone has the date, and we'll be talking about the other side of LLM use, how you might use it in your own research, in experiment design, in data analysis. The part of this that we're excited about, you know, that I think that'll be the topic for next month.
Yeah, November 13th, right? And Mary will be posting the video of this on the Behavioral Lab website shortly. And thank you everyone for your attention and your time. And thank you, Robert, for your expertise.
Thanks. All right.
Thanks for having me, everyone.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks.